Billionaire disguises as cab driver to meet estranged son. But his boy's words shatter him. The cap wasn't much of a disguise, but Michael Thompson tugged its brim down as if felt could hide 8 years of regret. He idled his yellow cab by the curb outside New York State University, where the cold gnawed the bones of morning, breath from passers-by steaming like campfire ghosts. A bus sighed and lurched away. Pigeons shouldered one another along the slush-dark curb, as though there were crumbs in the snow worth fighting for. Michael's hands, steady enough to sign mergers in a blink, trembled against the vinyl of the steering wheel. He told himself he was only a driver killing time, and even his heartbeat called him a liar. He'd rehearsed 100 greetings on the ride over, every one of them sounding like a man trying to pawn off an apology he couldn't afford. The dashboard clock clicked a minute older. The university gates spilled students the way a winter sky spills light, thin and a little tired. Then there he was, tall, narrow-shouldered, walking quick to hold in the January air. Jason. The boy wore worry like a second backpack, zipped to the ribs. His hair looked sleep-combed. His coat had a good New York thrift to it, silvered at the cuffs. Michael felt the old ache grab him where no surgeon could reach, an ache with edges in memory. 8 years fell off the building of time and hit him square in the chest. "Cab driver?" the young man asked, leaning in, eyes flicking from license plate to phone screen, and finally to the face under the cap. The car smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and the last rider's peppermint gum. Somewhere down the block, a street vendor rattled metal trays, the sound carrying like a spoon tapped on a glass. "That's me," Michael said, and the words came out rough, as if scraped over gravel. "You're Jason." "Greenwich Village," the boy said, already sliding into the back seat, the zipper on his backpack catching a thread and popping it with the soft betrayal of a violin string. He settled in and the seat gave a tired sigh. "Thanks," Michael signaled, eased into Fifth Avenue's stubborn river of steel, and stole a look in the mirror. The young face in the back had his mother's delicacy around the mouth and a little of Michael's own iron along the brow. Those eyes, though, set like someone who has learned to read bad weather and carry an umbrella inside. "Sorry," Jason said, thumbing his phone. "I need to grab this call." The voice he used for his friend was casual and threadbare at once. "Hey, Brian, I'm headed downtown." "No, about the bill. I don't have it yet." "By Friday, I swear. If Mrs. Margaret asks, tell her I picked up extra hours." "Yeah, the internship's still a joke, money-wise." But it's something Michael's knuckles paled against the wheel. A taxi horn argued 2 lanes over. Somewhere, a truck grumbled, like an old dog. He rolled through a green light like a man walking into church. Late. "Look," Jason said, lowering his voice, "I'm not calling him. You know who. I'd rather freeze than owe that man a sweater. A brittle laugh, a wall built brick by brick. Yeah, I'm fine. I'll figure it out." The words hit Michael the way truth hits, without apology. He kept his eyes on the avenue's long gray throat. A wiper squeaked across a dry patch of glass. His throat burned the way winter air burns the lungs of a runner who hasn't run in a while. "And Mrs. Margaret fainted again yesterday," Jason added, softer. "Clinic says she needs more tests. Expensive ones. I don't know how." Yet there was a gulp of silence. "I'll make it happen, okay? I'll call you later." He hung up and stared at the window, at the city's smeared watercolor of brick and advertisement. Michael waited until the light boxed them in with a red hand, and then turned just enough to be a voice, not a stranger. "Forgive me for overhearing," he said. If you need a decent hospital or a kind doctor, New York still has a few. I can recommend some. Jason glanced up, startled at kindness in a driver's mouth. He wore gratitude like a shirt he wasn't sure if fit. That's nice of you. It's for, well, the woman who raised me. She's... He stopped, set his jaw back in place. We'll manage. Sounds like she's a mother, Michael said, and felt the word catch like a fishbone. More than the original model ever managed, Jason said, then winced at how much he'd said, as if a secret had slipped a fence. Sorry. I don't usually unload on strangers. Sometimes it's easier, Michael answered. Strangers don't know the worst of us and can't use it later. He tasted the bitterness of that wisdom, old as his fear. What about your father? Could he help with the tests? That shuttered expression, the one Michael had put there with 8 years of absence, slid down like a shade. The boy leaned forward, elbows on knees, anger measured and tidy as a ledger. My father, he said, making the word do hard labor. He left when I was 12, hopped the ocean, built a life. Forgot he already had one. He sat back. So no. The light let them go, and Michael drove as if every block were a confession booth, as if the city could absolve a man by punishing him with its traffic. A gust threw grit against the chassis. His eyes stung, and he pretended it was salt. Maybe he had reasons, he said. The coward's gospel. Reasons? Jason's laugh had the age of winter in it. What's the compound interest on a reason when you're 12 and your house goes quiet? He turned his face to the window again. Do you have kids? I do, Michael said, and the words slid out like a man stepping on ice. I did. It's complicated. Then you know there isn't a math problem in the world that solves that. Jason's voice had steadied. He looked down at his hands, at the lifelines and the calluses. I used to think it was my fault. Amazing what kids will claim so their world still makes sense. Michael swallowed the lump that had taken up residence in his throat. I'm sure it wasn't, he said, and the certainty in his tone surprised even him. That's what she tells me, Jason murmured. She worked 3 houses and still made home smell like laundry soap and Sunday stew. Never made me feel like an invoice. He smiled without showing teeth. So when she needs me, I'm there. The heater clicked a little louder. A bicyclist scraped past with a hiss of tires through slush. Michael could feel the pounds of failure, the accrued interest of every missed school night and cheating sunrise. He drove as men drive when the only right turn is time. You work? He asked, careful not to sound like a census. All the hours God and city law allow, Jason said. Intern mornings at an architecture firm that pays in experience and thin coffee. After that, I tutor 3rd graders who believe math is a rumor. Nights I sling plates in a restaurant where the specials are hope and overtime. Weekends, I design logos for people who pay in exposure or gratitude, whichever's cheaper. Michael pictured his boardrooms, their glass teeth biting the sky, and wanted to apologize to every building for not being made of better material. And school? Full scholarship, Jason said, with a shrug that was half pride, half apology for having to be proud. New York State. Architecture. I sleep when I remember to, and fun, Michael prodded gently, because fathers are allowed to ask, and anonymous men have to pretend. Fun is expensive, Jason said, but his eyes softened. I've got friends, good ones. A best friend named Brian who's noisy, where I'm quiet. A girlfriend. That's complicated. Hard to keep anything alive when you're married to your schedule. The light pinned them again, and Michael looked back. The mirror a narrow window on the boy he'd left at 12 and found at 20. The city smelled of wet wool and street pretzels and the stubborn tang of exhaust. The cab's heater breathed on their shins. The small talk had turned into something with a pulse. "May I ask something personal?" Michael said. "Considering I've told you my grocery list of problems, be my guest. If you saw your father today," Michael asked, keeping his voice level as a mason, "what would you say?" Jason sat with the question a while, like a person warming his hands around it. Outside, a siren shouldered traffic aside, and a woman in a red hat laughed into her scarf. "I'd tell him he lost," Jason said at last. "Not me." "Not exactly. But the chance to know me while it would have been easy. The birthdays you can't rebake, the Tuesday afternoons you can't rehearse, the stupid jokes that only make sense at the kitchen table." He breathed. "I used to imagine forgiving anything just to see him in the doorway. That was a child's economy. I'm older now. I've learned to live with the hole where a father goes. It's part of the floor plan." "And if he asked forgiveness?" Michael asked, the words tasting of rust. "For which thing?" Jason's smile was soft and sorrowful. There were 1,000 small abandonments hiding under the big one, and they all need their separate signatures. He shrugged. "Some wounds become weather. You live around them." They rode the rest of the way in a silence that felt almost companionable. The cab's engine a low purr, winter light sagging on the buildings like old lace. Michael's chest kept time with what he wouldn't say. The village met them with its shabby grace, stoops wearing snow like a shawl. "This is me," Jason said, pointing to a narrow building that looked like it had decided to lean on its neighbor for warmth. He reached for his wallet. "How much do I owe you?" "Nothing," Michael said too quickly, like a man shoving back a door. Jason frowned. "You drove me." "You get paid. Consider it a good conversation rate," Michael said, trying to put a bow on a wound. "I don't take charity," Jason said. There was no heat in it, only dignity with boots on. "At least take my card," Michael said, and fished from his pocket the lie that had become a raft. "John Smith," with a number that rang to a phone that rang to him. "If you ever need a ride." "Or to talk?" Jason took it, turning the cheap cardstock between his fingers as if he could feel the truth by touch. "Why would you do that for a stranger?" "Because," Michael said, aware of the absurd balance he was trying to hold, "sometimes strangers line up like mile markers on the road you wish you'd taken." Jason nodded like a man who doesn't buy the product, but appreciates the salesman's effort. "Thanks, John," he said, and the name struck Michael in the ribs. "For the ride, for listening. I hope the tests come quickly," Michael said, "and come back kind." "For her sake," Jason said, and that was a prayer if ever one was whispered. He climbed out, tugged his coat close, and vanished into the village with the unremarkable grace of a person who has learned to move without expecting to be watched. Michael sat there until the meter started to scold, cap brim low, hands spread on the wheel like he'd been told to surrender. The cab smelled faintly of him now, old cologne at a distance, coffee from a cup he hadn't drunk, regret with its boots wet. He drove away as men drive when the future is a place you can only reach by turning around. By afternoon, he had turned a plan into motion, a thing money is good at doing even when it can't mend bones. A call to London, a wire to Manhattan, whispers to a foundation that could pass for federal grace in the right light. The sun, such as it was, dragged itself across winter sky and smudged out. 2 days later, the curb outside the university wore the same necklace of dirty snow. Students streamed past, with the unhurried urgency of the young, eyes glued to something glowing. Michael's phone buzzed with a request, and the name on the screen landed like a benediction he couldn't trust. Jason. He pulled up to the gate before the boy could wonder at miracles. "John," Jason said, surprised into warmth as he opened the back door. The cold climbed in with him and curled in the footwells like a cat. "Small city." "Sometimes it is," Michael said, and drove. "How's life?" "Better," Jason said, shoulders loosening as if he'd set down a bag. "You won't believe this, but Mrs. Margaret got into some assistance program. Full coverage for the test. She didn't even know she applied." He laughed, and there it was, the sound of a window being opened in a stuffy house. "I slept last night." "That's good luck finding its manners," Michael said, and pretended to be surprised in a way he'd been practicing since he was 12. The windshield wipers beat a slow metronome. "And you?" "I've got a job interview," Jason said, suddenly shy about it, like a man showing a baby photograph. "Admin stuff at the firm where I intern. Not exactly drawing cathedrals, but it pays in more than coffee." "And school?" "Fine," he said, then hesitated. "I also got this offer. 6 months in London. Sustainable architecture, big name program. It's a dream with bus fare. And the catch? Money first, then life," he said, smiling without joy. "And leaving her alone right now. Timing's a comedian with bad aim." They drifted with traffic. The cab's heater played Polite. The radio murmured the favorite song of people who buy furniture. Michael glanced at the mirror and saw a young man chewing surety into something like hope. "Did you talk to her about London?" he asked. "She told me to stop being an idiot and go," Jason said, his smile turning fond, rueful. "Even suggested I ask. Never mind." "Ask your father," Michael finished for him gently. "Yeah," Jason said. "I considered it for about 5 minutes and remembered 13 birthdays of radio silence." He shrugged. "I build my own bridges now." Michael let the quiet stretch. He had practiced silence for 8 years. It fit like a suit he should never have bought. The city grazed by. A deli with oranges stacked like sunrise. A barber sweeping hair that looked like small fallen forests. A woman walking a dog in a sweater braver than most people's hearts. "Can I tell you something?" Michael asked. "You can tell me anything," Jason said, immediate as trust and surprising as spring. "I have a son I haven't seen in a long time," Michael said, and the confession sat between them like a sleeping animal. "His mother died. I wasn't brave. I thought leaving would spare him my clumsiness." "That true?" Jason asked. And he said it like a man who wants to believe but has learned to inventory the merchandise. "It felt true while I was running," Michael said. "Then it felt like a lie that had married me." "Do you regret it?" Jason asked, his voice thinner, quieter, the way people talk in churches and hospital rooms. "Every day that ends in night," Michael said, and he didn't care that the answer was purple if it was honest. "Regret is the only thing that grows without sunshine." "Then why didn't you go back?" Jason pressed. The cab hummed. The city shrugged. "Fear," Michael said simply, "of not being wanted. Of not being enough. Of finding out he was better without me than with Jason." Studied the back of Michael's head, as if the truth might be written there in barber's chalk. "If I were him," he said slowly, "I'd want you to try anyway. Even if I slammed the door. You'd know you knocked." Michael pulled to the curb and pretended the GPS needed his attention. He drew a breath that showed up in the cab like a small white flag. "Do you think he might forgive me?" he asked, the humility of it scraping years from his voice. "I don't know," Jason said. Forgiveness has a mind of its own. But I think most sons want to believe their father wanted them. Even if he did a rotten job proving it, Michael merged again. The street ahead lay like a future, familiar and unknown, lined with the same old buildings that look different the day you finally look at them. He could feel something in him loosen, like a knot that has decided to be rope again. "Funny," Jason said after a stretch of quiet. "I've been giving you advice I haven't had the nerve to use. I've thought about reaching out too, to him. Not to forgive, not exactly. To understand why the door shut and stayed shut." "What stops you?" Michael asked, though he knew. "The answer," Jason said. "What if the why is me?" "It isn't," Michael said, with the certainty of a man who had been the why and knew it for what it was. Cowardice dressed as strategy. Fathers who leave do it because of the weather in their own heads. Jason let that settle. "You think it's possible to start over?" he asked. "I think it's possible to start," Michael said. "Over is a privilege earned after." They rolled into downtown's grid, where ambition and glass shake hands and pretend they're friends. The building Jason pointed to was a knife of steel and sense, the kind that reflected a winter sky and made it look expensive. "That's me," Jason said, patting his pocket as if to reassure his courage it still had his wallet. "Interview on the 32nd floor." "Want me to wait?" Michael asked, and it was a father's question dressed in a driver's coat. "If you got rides, take them." "I'll call if I need a lift," Jason said, hand already on the door. Then he paused, turned back, and offered something small and large at once. "John, thanks for listening, for not making me feel like a story you bothered to hear." "Anytime," Michael said, and the word had a weight to it now, like a promise learning to stand. "Good luck." Jason stepped out into the cold that bit ankles and brightened cheeks and disappeared into the building's revolving mouth, swallowed by opportunity or something that will do for now. Michael watched the door spin and knew, like men know the weather in their bones and the road in their palms, that the next door would be his, and he would have to walk through without a cap or a lie to keep the wind off. Money, for all its arrogance, was good at disguises. It could march into a hospital wearing the uniform of a government grant, or sneak through a clinic's door with the mask of assistance program. Michael knew how to move money the way a card sharp moves aces, invisible to the untrained eye. 2 days after the first cab ride, he set wires in motion across an ocean. Pounds shifted into dollars, dollars into a foundation account, and by the time the papers were stamped, the help looked as natural as rain. He told himself it wasn't charity, it was repayment with interest. But the truth was, he wanted to erase the tremor in Jason's voice when he talked about Mrs. Margaret fainting in the kitchen. He wanted to scrub clean the years when a woman bent her back 3 times over to keep a boy fed while he, Michael, built glass towers and watched profits rise like morning smoke. So he waited, cap pulled low again, outside the campus gates. The snow had thinned into gray lace on the sidewalks, and the wind rattled trash lids like a drummer with no rhythm. Students spilled out, scarves flapping like banners of a war no one admitted was being fought, between youth and rent, ambition and fatigue. Jason appeared a little straighter in the shoulders than before. He yanked open the back door with the awkward relief of someone finding a familiar face in a crowd. "John," he said, sliding into the seat. "Twice in 1 week. What are the odds?" Michael felt something break warm in his chest. "Small city," he replied, as if New York hadn't spent decades proving the opposite. Jason settled in, setting his bag down with care, like it carried not books but bricks of responsibility. "You won't believe what happened yesterday. Mrs. Margaret got a call. Some medical assistance program picked her up out of nowhere. Full coverage for her tests. She didn't even apply." Michael kept his eyes on the traffic light, pretending surprise like a stage actor who knows his lines too well. "That's a stroke of luck," he said. Jason laughed, the sound light and brittle, but real. "I slept properly last night for the first time in weeks. Not having to worry if she'll collapse again, it's like someone handed me a key to breathing." The cab rolled into traffic, heat humming low, the windshield framing the city like a restless painting. "Good to hear," Michael said. "And you? How's life beyond the clinic's phone calls?" Jason leaned back, letting the seat take more weight than before. "Busy. Got an interview today, admin position at the firm where I intern. Nothing glamorous, just scheduling and paper shuffling, but it means a paycheck instead of promises." Michael nodded, biting down on the urge to say he could bankroll an entire wing of the firm without blinking. Pride wasn't just Jason's, it was his too, twisted and scarred. "And there's this other thing," Jason continued, hesitation tracing his words. "I got an offer, 6 months in London, sustainable architecture program. The kind of opportunity that can flip a resume from maybe to must-have." Michael's grip on the wheel tightened. London. The very city where he'd buried himself in business, trying not to think of a 12-year-old boy crying in New York. Fate had a cruel humor. "What's holding you back?" he asked. Jason snorted softly. "What isn't?" "Money, for one. Flights, housing, extra fees. They add up to more than I make in a year. And then there's her. I can't leave Mrs. Margaret alone, not with her health. Timing's the comedian with bad timing. The city peeled by outside. Billboards half frozen, buses belching smoke. A saxophonist at a corner leaning into his horn with more hope than notes." Michael's silence stretched long enough that Jason glanced at the mirror. "You think I should go?" he asked, almost challenging. "I think dreams don't wait politely," Michael said. "But I also think family shouldn't be abandoned for them." Jason sighed, running a hand through his hair. "That's exactly the tug-of-war I've been losing sleep over. She told me to stop being stubborn, that she'd manage without me. Even told me maybe I should ask." He trailed off, the name unsaid, but hanging heavy. "Your father," Michael finished, his voice soft. Jason's laugh was sharp enough to cut glass. "I considered it. For 5 minutes. Then I remembered every Christmas morning spent staring at the door. Every birthday candle blown out without him there. If he wanted to help, he would have. 8 years is a long silence." Michael swallowed hard. His hands ached from how tightly he held the wheel. "Maybe he was afraid," he offered, the words trembling with truth. "Sometimes fear is louder than love." Jason leaned forward, his reflection in the mirror suddenly older than 20. Afraid? He was scared enough to vanish, but not scared enough to stay and fight? That's not fear. That's cowardice. The words struck like stones, but Michael didn't flinch. He deserved each one. For blocks they rode in silence, the cab's heater filling the space where words failed. Then Michael tried again, carefully. "Can I tell you something personal?" Jason raised an eyebrow. "Go ahead." "I had a son once," Michael began, the confession coming out wrapped in disguise. "His mother died young. I thought he'd be better off without me than with a broken man fumbling through fatherhood. So I left." Jason's gaze sharpened, but he stayed quiet. "I built a life," Michael continued, voice rough, Money, success, headlines. But every day since, I've wondered if I made the worst mistake a man could make. He paused, eyes flicking to the mirror. Do you think a son could forgive that? Jason sat back, the city lights flashing across his face like passing judgments. He took a long breath, then spoke quietly. Depends on how much he suffered, on whether the man comes back for real or just for show. But his voice softened. I think every kid wants to believe their father cares. Even if it's buried under years of hurt, Michael's throat tightened. The light turned red, and he welcomed the pause, staring at the glow like it held answers. Then maybe he should try, Jason added, even if it goes wrong, even if the son slams the door. At least then the father will know he tried. The words landed in Michael's chest like a torch in a cave. His son, without knowing, had just handed him permission. The cab rolled forward again, weaving through downtown traffic. Jason leaned his head back, eyes half closed, as if speaking the truth had left him lighter. You know what's funny? He murmured. I've been telling you to reconnect with your son, but I've never had the guts to do it myself. To reach out to him, to your father? Michael asked carefully. Yeah. Jason's jaw tightened. Sometimes I imagine it. Not to forgive. Not yet. Just to ask why. To hear him say something, anything, that explains why I wasn't enough to keep him here. Michael's grip on the wheel faltered. It wasn't you, he said firmly. It never was. Fathers who leave do it because of their own weakness, not because of the child. Jason's eyes glistened, though he blinked it away. You sound like you know that from experience. I do, Michael said quietly. I know because I've been that man. And I've lived every day regretting it. For a long while, neither spoke. The cab's engine hummed. The city stretched wide, and somewhere above them the winter sky held back its snow. When they finally reached the tall glass building of Jason's interview, the young man lingered a moment before opening the door. Thanks, John. For the ride. For listening. For everything. Michael nodded, his voice too thick for words. Jason stepped out, adjusted his bag, and squared his shoulders before walking into the building. His reflection caught briefly in the revolving glass door, young, determined, carrying the weight of both anger and hope. Then, he disappeared inside. Michael sat frozen behind the wheel, staring at the door as if it had swallowed half his soul. For the first time in 8 years, he felt the possibility of a bridge being rebuilt, one cautious plank at a time. Snow had a way of making the city look honest. It covered the potholes, softened the graffiti, and laid a white hush across streets that were usually full of shouting. But Michael knew better. Snow melted, and what was underneath was still there. He sat behind the wheel of his cab, the engine idling low, watching students file out of New York State University with scarves up to their noses and books clutched like shields. Jason came out later than most, his stride brisk but his shoulders slouched. He looked like a young man trying to make himself bigger for the world and smaller for his own worries at the same time. Michael pulled forward just as Jason checked his phone for the cab app. John, Jason said with a faint smile as he slid into the back seat. At this rate, I'm going to think you're stalking me. Michael forced a chuckle, masking the truth. Guess I just have good timing. Jason dropped his bag onto the seat, the sound heavier than it should have been. Hospital, please. Greenwich again. Mrs. Margaret's got more tests. The way he said it made Michael's stomach knot. He put the car into drive, easing into traffic. Outside, Headlights smeared across the wet asphalt, and horns cried out like crows fighting over scraps. Inside the cab, silence pressed against them until Jason cracked it open with a sigh. "She fainted again last night. Scared the hell out of me. Doctor says her heart's weaker than they thought. More tests, more bills, more nights lying awake wondering what happens if I can't keep her going." Michael gripped the wheel. He had the money to buy a dozen hearts if the surgeons could transplant hope as easily as muscle. But money was poison if handed wrong. Jason would spit it back at him, thinking it charity from a stranger. "I'm sorry to hear that," Michael said softly. "Hospitals have a way of turning fear into invoices." Jason gave a dry laugh. "Tell me about it." "Every time I open the mailbox, I feel like I'm pulling lottery tickets where the prize is more debt." The cab slowed for a red light. Michael risked a glance in the rearview mirror. Jason's eyes were rimmed red from lack of sleep, his cheeks hollowed by weeks of cheap meals and long nights. Pride held him upright, but pride was no medicine. "Do you ever get tired?" Michael asked before he could stop himself. "Not just physically? Tired of being the one holding everything up?" Jason met his eyes in the mirror. "Every damn day. But what's the alternative? Let her fall? She didn't let me fall when she had every reason to. So no, I don't get to quit. Not now, not ever." Michael swallowed hard. The words rang with the kind of loyalty he had abandoned, the kind that still burned him awake at night. When they reached the hospital, Jason gathered his bag but lingered a moment. "Hey, John. Thanks for the rides. I don't say it enough, but it helps knowing there's someone out there who gives a damn, even if it's just a cab driver who doesn't charge me extra when I can't tip." Michael smiled faintly. "Sometimes strangers care more than the people who should." Jason gave a small nod, then disappeared into the sliding doors, swallowed by fluorescent light. Michael sat there staring at the entrance until horns blared behind him. He pulled away, heart heavy, but mind already racing. He had promised Mrs. Margaret's bills would be covered without Jason ever knowing it was him. Money would wear a disguise again. This time as a quiet hospital grant, stamped with bureaucratic insignia. He made the calls that afternoon, his voice steady even as his chest felt like it was caving in. That night, he parked outside the hospital, engine off, watching the revolving doors. Snow drifted down in lazy spirals, catching in the halo of the street lamp. Hours passed. Nurses came and went. Patients shuffled out wrapped in coats. Finally, Jason appeared, dragging his feet, phone pressed to his ear. "Yeah, Brian," he said, voice tired but lighter. "You won't believe it. They said some low-income assistance fund is covering the costs. Can you believe our luck? I swear, it feels like someone up there is actually watching out for us." He paused, listening, then laughed softly. "No, not him. Never him. I'd rather crawl than take help from my father. This is different. This feels like mercy." Michael sat in the shadows, his breath fogging the window. He wanted to roll it down and tell Jason it wasn't heaven, it was him. But confessions were fragile things. Drop them too early, and they shattered. The following morning, Jason was waiting at the curb again. He climbed into the cab with a cup of cheap coffee clutched in both hands, steam rising in faint curls. "Morning, John." To the firm downtown, Michael merged into traffic. "Big day?" Jason smiled faintly. "Interview for that admin position. I don't even know if I want it, but I need it. Bills don't care about dreams." Michael raised an eyebrow. "And your London program?" Jason's smile faded. "Still thinking. Mrs. Margaret says I should go. Says I can't chain my future to her declining health. But leaving her feels like leaving oxygen behind traffic slowed near an intersection where a construction crew hammered steel. Sparks flew like tiny comets in the gray morning. Michael tapped the wheel, debating. Then he said, "Can I tell you something?" "About my son?" Jason sipped his coffee, curious. "Go ahead." "I left him when he was 12. Thought I was doing him a favor. Thought my absence would hurt less than my broken presence. But the truth is, I was just afraid. And fear grows teeth. If you feed it long enough." Jason stared out the window, snow turning to slush against the curbs. "And do you regret it?" "Every day since," Michael admitted, voice thick. "Regret's a bed I made and never stopped lying in." Jason was quiet for a long moment, then said softly, "If you still think about him every day, then maybe you should try. Maybe it's not too late." Michael felt his throat close. "You think sons forgive so easily?" Jason shrugged, his expression unreadable. "Not easily. Maybe not completely. But forgiveness isn't about ease. It's about whether the father shows up again and keeps showing up. No more disappearing acts." Michael gripped the wheel tighter, hope flickering like a match in wind. By the time they reached the firm, Jason looked calmer, his shoulders less hunched. He gathered his bag, then hesitated at the door. "John, if your son ever gives you a chance, don't waste it. Life's too short to keep playing coward," and Michael nodded, unable to trust his voice. Jason walked away, tall against the glass towers, and Michael sat watching until the young man vanished inside. Hospitals smelled like boiled linen and tired hope. Michael learned that from hours of waiting in parking lots, his cab parked under the jaundiced glow of sodium lamps, engine idling like a restless dog. He'd sit there watching the automatic doors swallow and spit people out, some with relief in their eyes, others carrying sorrow folded in the paper envelopes. He preferred the nights Jason didn't notice him, because noticing meant conversation, and conversation meant lies. The next time Jason climbed into the cab, his face was pale, lips pressed tight as if to hold back words that might unravel him. He dropped his bag on the seat with a dull thud. "Hospital again?" Michael asked gently. Jason nodded. "They admitted her this time. Said her heart can't take the stress anymore. She's fragile, John. I've never seen her like this. She used to carry groceries up 3 flights of stairs without breaking a sweat. Now she can't even stand at the stove without swaying." Michael's chest ached. The woman who had raised his boy, done his job better than he had ever tried, was fading under fluorescent lights while he sat pretending to be a stranger. "I'm sorry," he said. The words felt useless, like handing a teaspoon to bail out a flood. Jason rubbed his eyes with the heel of his hand. "They're talking surgery. Open heart. 200 grand minimum. You know what that number feels like to someone working 3 jobs? Like standing at the bottom of a skyscraper with no elevator." Michael tightened his grip on the wheel. 200,000 was less than the rounding error on one of his company's quarterly reports. He could write the check before the light turned green. But Jason's pride was granite, and granite cracked only under earthquakes. "Sometimes," Michael said slowly, "help comes from places you don't expect." Jason let out a bitter laugh. "You sound like Mrs. Margaret. She said maybe I should swallow my pride and ask my father. But that's not happening. Not in this lifetime." Michael bit down on the truth, trying to claw its way out of his throat. They pulled into the hospital lot, the building rising like a slab of ice against the night sky. Jason didn't get out right away. He sat there, staring at the dashboard, the soft hum of the heater filling the silence. "John," he said finally, his voice low, "you ever feel like the universe is just waiting for you to crack? Like no matter how much you push, it's ready to pull the rug the second you breathe?" Michael turned, catching his son's reflection in the rearview mirror, eyes raw with exhaustion, jaw tight with the stubbornness of youth. "Every day," Michael admitted, "but sometimes the rug doesn't matter. Sometimes standing back up is all the universe notices." Jason nodded faintly, then opened the door. "Thanks for the ride." Michael watched him walk toward the entrance, shoulders squared like armor over a breaking heart. The surgery was scheduled within the week. Michael made sure of it. Money shifted hands quietly, cloaked in the paperwork of hospital charity funds, the ink signed by people who'd never seen his face. He stayed invisible even as his resources bent the future toward survival. On the morning of the procedure, he parked again outside the hospital. Snow fell in lazy spirals, dissolving on the windshield. He saw Jason pacing by the entrance, phone pressed to his ear, words spilling fast. "No, Brian, I don't know how." Some program came through. "It's like magic. They're going to operate tomorrow." "Yeah," I cried. "Okay? She's my mom, man. She's all I've got. If this works, maybe I can breathe again." Michael felt tears sting his own eyes. He reached for the wiper switch, blinking hard as the snow smeared across the glass. Jason ended the call, shoving the phone into his pocket, then glanced toward the parking lot. His eyes landed on the cab, recognition flashing. He walked over, opening the back door with the weight of someone carrying too much. "You again," he said with a tired smile. "Guess fate's got a sense of humor." Michael forced a chuckle. "Where to?" "Nowhere. Just drive. I need to think." So they drove. Through side streets where shopkeepers shoveled snow from their stoops, past diners glowing warm with the smell of coffee and grease, under bridges where shadows huddled against the cold. Jason leaned his head against the window, breath fogging the glass. "She's going to make it," he said, more to himself than to Michael. "I keep telling myself that. She has to. She's too stubborn not to." Michael wanted to say he'd made sure of it, that no scalpel would pause for lack of money. Instead, he said, "She sounds strong." Jason laughed softly. "Stronger than me. Always has been. You know, when I was 13, I asked her why she never complained. She said, 'Because life doesn't care if you cry, but the people you love do.' I've carried that ever since. Maybe that's why I don't let myself break." Michael swallowed, the ache in his chest sharp as winter wind. "Maybe she taught you how to bend instead of break." Jason turned, studying him. "You talk like someone who knows about breaking." Michael kept his eyes on the road. "I've done my share." The city blurred by, neon signs bleeding into the falling snow. The cab smelled faintly of coffee and wet wool, the heater ticking as it fought the cold. Jason finally sat back, exhaling slow. "You know what scares me most?" he said quietly. "Not losing her. Not even the surgery failing. It's being alone again. I was 12 the last time I felt that. When my dad walked out, the house went quiet in a way that still echoes. I can't do that again." Michael's hands shook on the wheel. He wanted to pull over, to grab Jason's shoulders, to confess everything. Instead, he said, "Maybe you won't be alone this time. Maybe life has a way of sending the right people when you need them most." Jason gave him a long, searching look. "You really believe that?" Michael nodded. "I have to." They drove in silence until Jason finally said, "Thanks, John, for listening, for not making me feel crazy, for being here." Michael's throat closed. He managed a rough "anytime." Jason stepped out at the hospital, turning back once before disappearing inside. His breath hung in the cold air like smoke, vanishing too quickly. Michael sat there long after, the cab engine purring steady, his heart anything but. He knew the truth would have to come out. Lies wore thin, and this one was already fraying. But for now, he clung to the one thing Jason had given him without knowing: the chance to stay, to be present, to be something like a father again. Hospitals never bothered to disguise themselves. They smelled of boiled bleach and vending machine coffee, carried the same soundtrack of wheezing air vents and rubber soles squeaking across linoleum, and wore that beige paint that looked chosen by a committee of people afraid of colors. Michael sat hunched in a chair built for punishment rather than rest, holding a paper cup that pretended to be coffee but tasted more like the inside of a cardboard box left out in the rain. The steam clung to his face, warm but dishonest. Beside him, Jason filled out paperwork that seemed designed to drain the courage out of a man one signature at a time. His hand shook, though he pressed hard enough on the ballpoint that the carbon paper nearly tore. Emergency contact, insurance number, responsible party. Those were bureaucratic words, but Michael could see the weight of them bending Jason's back. The boy had the set jaw of someone trying not to flinch in front of strangers. "Family waiting area is just down the hall," the nurse said kindly, gathering up the stack of forms. Her tone was practiced, compassion with a stopwatch running behind it. Jason nodded, lips pressed thin. The word family lingered longer in the air than the smell of disinfectant. He didn't correct her. He simply carried it like an ill-fitting coat. Michael's throat tightened at that because he knew whose fault it was that the word didn't fit. They watched Mrs. Margaret pass by on a gurney. She was pale but still carried the faint mischief of someone who believed life had been oversold as serious. She caught Jason's sleeve with a frail hand and whispered, "Don't you burn the coffee while I'm gone." He managed a half-smile that looked stapled on. Michael, acting on reflex he hadn't earned, tugged the edge of her blanket so it wouldn't slip off. The nurse noticed. People always did when care came naturally. It gave him away. Then the swinging door sealed her from sight, and the waiting began. The family room was no sanctuary. A television bolted to the wall played a talk show with the sound muted. All wide gestures and canned laughter the room couldn't hear. Plastic chairs lined the walls, each one angled just enough to remind you of the clock ticking in the corner. Michael sat across from Jason, both men pretending to sip at coffee that could strip varnish. "You eaten anything real today?" Michael asked, his voice rough with fatigue. "Just this," Jason said, lifting his cup. "Lied to me about being coffee." "I should sue. Mine's guilty of fraud, too," Michael said. The small joke cracked Jason's armor just enough that his mouth twitched upward. Two men drinking lies together. Somehow, that made them allies. Jason leaned forward, elbows on knees, eyes glued to the double doors where Margaret had vanished. His foot tapped the floor like it was trying to dig a tunnel out. Michael watched him and thought, "That's my boy. Stubborn enough to beat the air itself if it dared get in the way." After a silence, Jason said quietly, "She taught me to cook when I was 13. Burned everything at first. Pancakes, eggs, toast, you name it, I ruined it. She just laughed, said, 'Consistency is a skill. You consistently burn things.' Then she made me keep going till I got it right. We lived off scorched eggs for a week." Michael chuckled softly. though guilt gnawed his insides. Consistency will carry you further than talent sometimes. Jason shot him a look. Sounds like you learned that from experience. I've been enrolled in life school a long while, Michael said. Tuition steep. Jason tilted his head. Was it worth the price? I'm still paying, Michael murmured, and the words surprised even himself. The conversation lapsed again, filled instead by the hum of machines and the muffled sob of a child behind a curtain. Jason rubbed his eyes with the heel of his palm, then asked without looking at him, "You ever pray?" Michael shifted in the hard chair. "When I remember how." "What do you say?" "Mostly two things. I'm sorry, and help. Order depends on the day." Jason exhaled a laugh that wasn't humor so much as recognition. "Yeah, I've been trying to add a third one, thank you, just in case someone's keeping score." "Not a bad idea," Michael said, though his own throat burned. The hours stretched, chewing slowly through them. At some point, the nurse returned, smile measured, hands empty. "She's stable. Doctors please so far. Recovery will be slow," but promising Jason sagged against the wall as though invisible weights had just slid off his back. Relief shimmered in his eyes, but so did exhaustion. Michael felt his own lungs work again, remembered he'd been holding air like a miser hoarding coins. Later, in the ICU, Margaret looked fragile, but still herself. The machines beeped their clipped language, green lines pulsing on screens. Jason leaned close, kissed her temple, whispered, "Told you I'd be here." "You look like a boy who needs sleep," she whispered back. "I'll sleep after you do." Her eyes slid to Michael, sharp as pins, despite the anesthesia. She greeted him with the name he'd borrowed, John, though the way she said it made clear she wasn't fooled. "Take him home later. He'll try to camp here." Jason started to protest, but she silenced him with the kind of glance only mothers and generals master. Michael nodded, heart pounding. Back in the elevator, Jason leaned against the panel, staring at the numbers. "She knew you," he said suddenly. "She knows people," Michael answered. "No, she knew you." Not just as some cab driver. Michael stared at the floor. A crack in the tile followed his gaze like guilt. "She's observant." Jason didn't push. He just folded the thought away, though his eyes still carried the question. Outside, the January air slapped them with its raw hands. Jason shoved his fists into his coat pockets, exhaling clouds that vanished too quickly. He looked like a young man carrying more than a backpack. He looked like someone fighting both the cold and history. That evening, Michael found himself in Margaret's apartment, sitting on a kitchen chair that squeaked every time he breathed. The place smelled of detergent and fried onions, with a stubborn undercurrent of lemon polish. Margaret, pale but steady, poured tea into mismatched mugs. "You came back," she said matter-of-factly, settling across from him. "I had to." "Wanting to is easy. Staying is hard. I want to stay." Her eyes pinned him like insects under glass. "Do you?" He nodded, words sticking. "More than anything." She studied him a long moment, then rose and fetched a shoebox from a cupboard. The cardboard edges were softened by years, the tape frayed. She placed it in front of him. "What's this?" he asked. "Letters," she said. "He wrote them to you." "Never mailed. 50 of them, maybe more. Birthdays, wins, losses. Nights he couldn't sleep. I kept them in case you ever showed up asking what you missed." Michael lifted the lid with trembling hands. Inside lay stacks of paper, folded, some smudged with fingerprints, others dog-eared. He picked one at random. "Dear Dad, I learned to ride my bike today. I fell and scraped my knee, but I kept trying till I got it right. Mrs. M clapped. I pretended I didn't care, but I wished it was you cheering. Do you even remember what my laugh sounds like? Michael's vision blurred. His chest squeezed, as though the words themselves had hands. He tried another. Dear Dad, today I scored 2 goals in the school game. Everyone's parents cheered. I pretended the silence didn't bother me, but it did. The letters grew older in his trembling fingers, the handwriting sharpening, the tone hardening, rage mixing with longing, hope thinning into cynicism. He couldn't read more. He pressed the lid back on, clutching the box as though it contained Jason himself. Tears leaked down his face without permission. Margaret touched his shoulder. They're not easy reading. But they're his truth. I stole years from him, Michael choked. Then give him the years you have left, she said. That night, Michael drove aimlessly, neon signs blurring through his wet eyes. The city hummed indifferently around him, horns blaring, tires hissing on damp asphalt. He stopped under a traffic light that painted his windshield red and muttered, I'll stay this time. No more running. The next morning, he parked near the university again. Jason climbed into the cab, eyes brighter than yesterday. She's better, Jason said. Doctor says she might come home tomorrow. Relief warmed his voice, though shadows of fatigue still clung to him. That's good, Michael said, and meant it with his whole chest. Jason fiddled with his backpack strap. I've been thinking, I want to see him. Michael's grip tightened on the wheel. Your father? Jason nodded. His gaze didn't waver. I need to hear why. Not to forgive, just to understand. I'm tired of carrying questions like boulders. Michael's throat felt raw. Are you sure? No. But sometimes not sure is still the only road. Michael started the engine, city noise rushing back in. He whispered to himself, then it's time. And the cab pulled toward downtown, toward glass towers that reflected both ambition and regret, toward the office where a man would finally meet his own son without disguise. Corporate towers at dawn looked less like buildings and more like ambitions frozen in glass. Michael stood in the lobby of his own creation, a skyscraper polished until you could mistake it for the sky itself. Normally, he liked the way the floor reflected shoes and power ties, but that morning the shine just reminded him of ice, and he was already slipping. Sarah, his secretary of 15 years, eyed him like a nurse watching a patient try to hide fever. Mr. Thompson, your 9 o'clock? Cancel it, Michael interrupted. His voice was clipped, not cruel, but scared of breaking. Clear the rest of the day. She blinked. Sir, the board? Clear it, he repeated, softer this time. And Sarah? In a few minutes a young man will come up. His name is Jason. When he arrives, send him in. No interruptions, no matter what you hear. Her brows arched. Jason, who is he? Michael adjusted his tie, though it suddenly felt like a noose. My son. The word fell heavy between them, a word he'd kept caged for nearly a decade. Sarah, who had typed 1,000 of his memos and memorized every shade of his moods, had never once heard him mention a boy. She covered her surprise with professional grace, nodding briskly, though her eyes lingered on him as if she'd just glimpsed a stranger inside her employer. Michael retreated into his office, shut the door, and pulled off the cab driver's cap that had been his shield these past weeks. He set it on the desk. The thing looked ridiculous there. An orphan in a room of leather chairs and polished mahogany. He ruffled his hair with both hands, trying to sculpt himself back into the man the world knew. Michael Thompson, financier, builder of empires. But the mirror behind his desk betrayed him. It didn't show a titan. It showed a man trembling, eyes raw, skin gray with worry, about to meet his past in the flesh. He barely had time to breathe before Sarah's knock came. "Sir, he's here." Michael's heart stumbled like a drunk. "Send him in." The door opened. Jason walked in, his stride stiff with nerves but lit by determination. He wore his cheapest blazer, one that fit like borrowed courage, and clutched the strap of his backpack like a shield. His eyes darted across the room, taking in the city skyline visible through the panoramic glass, the sleek desk, the awards on the wall. "Excuse me," Jason said, voice steady but a shade too high. "My name is Jason Thompson. I'm here to speak with Michael Thompson. I'm his son." Michael rose slowly from behind the desk. His knees quaked. "Jason." The boy turned and froze. His mouth fell open. For a heartbeat, silence swallowed everything, even the hum of the HVAC. Then Jason's eyes narrowed in recognition, and his voice cracked like glass dropped on stone. "John?" Michael's throat locked. "Jason, Jason's face drained color, then flushed red. "What the hell are you doing here? Where's my father? Where's Michael Thompson?" Michael took one step forward, palms raised as if approaching a skittish horse. "I am Michael Thompson." The words detonated. Jason staggered back, shaking his head as if trying to wake from a nightmare. No, that's not true." "It's true," Michael said softly. "I am your father." Jason's chest heaved. Don't you dare call me that." Michael reached for him with words he wasn't sure existed. "I know I lied. I know the disguise was wrong. But I needed to see you, to talk with you, to—" "8 years!" Jason exploded, his voice echoing against the glass walls. "8 years I waited for you. And when you finally show your face, you what? You play dress-up? Pretend to be some cabbie so you can peek into my life like it's a damn experiment?" Michael flinched, the words striking harder than fists. "I was afraid." "Afraid?" Jason's laugh was ragged, dangerous. He raked a hand through his hair. "You weren't afraid to abandon me when I was 12. You weren't afraid to let me think I wasn't worth staying for. But suddenly you're too scared to knock on my door like a man?" Michael's voice cracked. "I thought you wouldn't want me." Jason's eyes blazed. "You thought right." He began pacing the office, hands clenching, unclenching. The city outside stretched indifferent and endless, but in that room everything was small and sharp and burning. Michael followed him with his gaze. Each step Jason took another nail driven into his chest. "All those conversations," Jason said, his voice low now, trembling, "about fathers, about regret. Were you mocking me? Was I some kind of entertainment for you? Taxi confessions with the son you threw away?" Michael's eyes stung. "No, every word was real. Every care I showed you was real. Being John gave me the courage to lie." Jason spun on him. "That's all it gave you. Lies on top of lies. Do you know what it felt like? For a moment, for one damn week, I thought I'd met someone who cared. Someone who listened. Someone who—" His voice cracked. "And now I find out he was just the ghost who left me, wearing another mask." Michael took a step closer, desperation raw in his voice. "I wasn't mocking you. I was learning to love you again." "Love?" Jason spat the word. "You don't get to use that word. Love doesn't disappear for 8 years. Love doesn't let a 12-year-old boy cry himself to sleep, wondering what he did wrong. Love doesn't sneak back, dressed as a stranger." The silence that followed was deafening. The office, with its panoramic windows and leather furniture, had never felt smaller. Michael's pulse roared in his ears. Jason stood with fists at his sides, trembling, not with fear, but fury and heartbreak. "Jason, please," Michael whispered. "Please let me explain." "Explain what?" Jason shouted. "That you were a coward? That you ran off to play businessman in Europe while Mrs. Margaret worked herself half to death raising me? That you tried to patch it up with money I never asked for?" Michael's shoulders sagged. "I came back because I couldn't live without you anymore." Jason's eyes filled, but the tears burned hot. "You already lived without me. 8 years. Birthdays, graduations, nights. I sat in that apartment wondering why I wasn't enough. You lived just fine without me." Michael reached out instinctively. Jason stepped back so sharply he nearly hit the glass wall. "You lost the right," Jason said, voice shaking, but sure. "You lost the right to be my father the day you walked out. John the cab driver meant more to me in a week than Michael Thompson did in 12 years. At least, he seemed honest." The words ripped through Michael like a blade. He opened his mouth, but nothing came. Jason turned, striding toward the door. His hand gripped the brass handle, then paused. He looked back once, eyes wet and blazing. "I don't want to see you again. Not ever. And this time it's my decision, not yours." The door slammed hard enough to rattle the frames on the wall. Michael stood frozen, the echo of the slam ringing louder than any boardroom applause he'd ever earned. His knees gave, and he sank into his chair, burying his face in his hands. The skyscraper around him suddenly felt like a cage built to house regret. The city outside Michael's tower moved as if nothing had happened. Yellow cabs coughed their way down the avenues, steam hissed up from manhole covers, and somewhere down the block a hot dog vendor cursed the wind for stealing his napkins. But inside Michael Thompson's office, silence sat heavy, a silence that tasted of ash. He had chased Jason into the elevator, but the doors had shut in his face. By the time he reached the lobby, Jason was gone, swallowed by the crowd like a coin dropped in a storm drain. Michael stood there among polished marble and brass rails, a man with too much wealth in his pockets and nothing in his hands. When he finally drove across town to Margaret's narrow apartment, she answered the door with a stare sharp enough to cut leather. She had wrapped herself in a cardigan 2 sizes too big, her hair tucked behind her ears in weary strands. "He came here," she said before he could open his mouth. Michael sagged into the nearest chair like a man shot. "How was he?" "Destroyed," she said flatly. "More broken than the day you left." He buried his face in his palms. "I ruined it all again." Margaret poured tea into mismatched mugs, the steam curling into the air like smoke off a battlefield. "Yes, you did. But you're still breathing, and that means you've got work left." He told me he never wants to see me again. She sat opposite him, her knees close to his like they had once shared foxholes. "So you wait. You stay close, quiet as a shadow, until the day he decides he might need you." Not a moment sooner, not a moment later, Michael lifted his head, eyes red. "What if that day never comes? Then you'll at least have done the one thing you never managed before, stayed put." The words struck like nails hammered into his chest. He nodded slowly. "I'll stay." The weeks that followed reshaped Michael's life. No more boardrooms, no flights across the Atlantic, no champagne receptions where men barked about quarterly profits. His world shrank to the size of a few city blocks. The university steps where Jason lugged his books, the architecture firm where he interned, the little apartment with peeling paint where he returned at night. Michael never approached. He stayed back, parked beneath street lamps or crouched inside diners with coffee gone cold. He watched Jason hustle, shoulders always pitched forward as if bracing against invisible wind. He watched the boy smile for friends, with a smile that never reached his eyes. He watched until watching became its own form of penance. At times he thought, this is what fathers do. They guard the door against wolves, even if the son inside doesn't know their name. But wolves don't always come wearing fur. One winter morning, Jason burst from the apartment, face pale, hair uncombed, running as if chased by fire. Michael followed, tires skidding on the icy street, until Jason reached the hospital. Inside the sterile halls, Michael caught enough of the exchange to learn the truth. Margaret had collapsed again. Her heart was failing, doctors said, the kind of failing that couldn't be coaxed back with rest or hope. Surgery was the only chance, and the price tag carried more zeros than Jason had ever seen in one place. Jason's voice cracked as he argued with the doctor. $200,000? We don't even make that in a decade. The doctor's gaze softened but stayed firm. Without it, she won't last a year. Michael stood in the corner, hidden behind a partition, feeling the words slice him open. 200,000. To him, it was pocket change, less than he had once lost in a single bad afternoon on the market. To Jason, it was a mountain taller than hope. When Jason stepped into the corridor, Michael followed him. Jason, he said carefully, let me help. Jason spun, fury sparking in his eyes. Stay out of this. She's sick. She needs surgery. I can cover it. I said stay out. Jason's voice echoed down the hall, heads turning. You think you can buy your way back with one check? Save her life and call the debt even? That's not how this works, Michael swallowed hard. This isn't about debt. It's about keeping her alive. Jason's chest heaved. She kept me alive when you wouldn't. If anyone deserves to pay the price, it's me. I'll find the money. How? Jason shook his head, jaw tight. Doesn't matter. I'll work nights, sell whatever I have, beg if I have to. But I won't let you swoop in like some hero. You lost that role a long time ago. The words tore Michael open. But he didn't argue. He simply nodded once, stepped back, and whispered, Then let me be the villain who pays anyway. 2 days later, the papers were signed, the surgery scheduled. Michael wired the money through channels, so twisted Jason couldn't trace it if he tried. He made it look like a grant, a forgotten program, a fluke of mercy. When the nurse told Jason that the hospital had secured funding through a special assistance fund, Jason blinked in disbelief. I didn't apply for anything like that. Sometimes these programs find you, the nurse said, too busy to see the storm gathering in the boy's eyes. Jason turned toward the waiting area, where Michael sat with his head bowed. Their eyes met. Jason's lips pressed into a hard line. This doesn't change anything, he said coldly. Michael nodded. I know. Jason looked as if he wanted to spit fire. But then the gurney arrived, Margaret smiling weakly from atop it. Don't scowl, boy, she whispered to him. Anger won't hold me together on that table. Jason clutched her hand, tears burning behind his lashes. I'm not angry at you. She glanced at Michael, who stood a few steps away, heart in his throat. Maybe that's enough for today. The surgery lasted hours. Hours in which Michael paced the corridor until his shoes squeaked raw. Hours in which Jason sat motionless, staring at the floor as though he could bore through it with sheer will. Every so often their eyes met, but neither spoke. Finally the surgeon appeared, cap in hand, face tired but smiling. She made it. Strong as they come. With rest she'll see years. Yet Jason's knees buckled. Relief surged through him like sunlight through storm clouds. He leaned against the wall, shoulders shaking. Michael reached out instinctively, but Jason flinched from the touch. "She'll want to see you first," Jason said hoarsely. "Not me." Michael stepped back, hands empty, eyes wet. That night Jason sat by Margaret's bed, watching the steady rise and fall of her chest. He whispered promises about finishing school, about making her proud, about never leaving. Michael watched from the hallway, unseen, and thought, that's what fatherhood looks like. He learned it from her, not me. Yet when Margaret stirred, her eyes opened just enough to find Michael in the doorway. She smiled faintly, raised a finger, and beckoned him in. Jason turned, frowning. "He doesn't belong here." Margaret's voice was thin but clear. "Yes, he does." Jason's protest died on his lips. He looked at her, at the tubes and monitors, then at Michael. Resentment burned. But beneath it, something softer flickered. A boy's hunger for family, for answers, for a father who had finally stayed. Michael stepped to the bedside, every movement heavy with awe and shame. He placed his hand over hers, feeling the fragile strength still pulsing there. "Thank you," he whispered, not sure if he spoke to Margaret, to Jason, or to the merciful surgeon who'd bought them more time. Margaret's eyes closed again, satisfied. Jason exhaled hard, like a man lowering a weight. He looked at Michael, jaw tight, voice low. "I don't forgive you. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But I see you?" Michael nodded, tears threatening again. "That's enough." And for the first time in 8 long years, father and son stood side by side in the same room, not reconciled, not healed, but no longer strangers.